Lola Cruz stepped carefully onto the polished marble floor of L'Ambrosia, the city's most exclusive brunch restaurant. She adjusted the worn strap of her tote bag and took a deep breath. The scent of freshly baked croissants mingled with rich espresso filled the air, promising indulgence far beyond what her modest thrift store blouse suggested she was accustomed to. The sparkling crystal chandeliers cast soft prisms over the glossy surfaces and velvet booths. It was a place where lavish silk scarves and designer shoes seemed as commonplace as the silverware. Her simple canvas shoes barely made a sound as she moved, but the hush that fell over some nearby tables felt loud in its own way. A group of women at a nearby table exchanged glances, her presence tipping the delicate balance of their polished world. "Does she even know she's not in the staff room?" one whispered, her smirk sharp as a knife. The other snorted softly, "Probably here for the crumbs." Lola's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her chin lifted, meeting the opulent surroundings with quiet determination. The brunch manager, a figure dressed immaculately in a tailored jacket, appeared by the entrance like a shadow with purpose. Her eyes scanned Lola from the scuffed shoes to the modest bag, pausing on the way Lola carried herself, a slight slump that spoke of many unspoken weighty days. With subtle but unmistakable disdain, the manager's lips pursed. Nearby patrons whispered aloud, some chuckling audibly. "Must be lost," one man said with a smirk loud enough for nearby ears. Lola tightened her grip on her bag but made no move to flee. Her gaze swept the elegant room, soaking in the exclusivity she was about to challenge. The brunch manager's approach was swift, measured, and unmistakably purposeful. Lola felt the shift in the atmosphere like a sudden chill. "Excuse me," the manager said sharply, her tone laced with a thin canopy of politeness that barely masked suspicion. "Can I help you? Are you lost?" Lola looked up, steadying her voice despite the knot tightening in her chest. "I'm here to enjoy the brunch," she said quietly but clearly. "I made a reservation." The manager's narrowed eyes flicked down to the tote bag once more, a shadow of disbelief crossing her sharp features. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "There's no reservation under your name," she said, raising her voice just enough to catch the attention of nearby tables. "Are you certain you're in the right place? Our guest list is tightly curated. We don't accept walk-ins, and certainly not without prior notice." The words hit Lola like a cold slap. Around her, conversations faltered for a moment before rising again, a murmur of interest, some amused, some curious. One woman at a nearby table called out with a loud, sharp giggle, "Oh honey, you're clearly not one of the special guests. Maybe you work in the kitchen?" A few heads turned Lola's direction, phones subtly raised to capture the scene, some with a glint of malice, others with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The manager's voice trailed through the room like a pointed dagger. "This isn't a place for people who can't afford the right look. We care about our atmosphere here. It's not just about money, it's about fitting the brand. You're, frankly, out of place." Lola's stomach knotted. She had expected a challenge, but not this level of public dismissal. She struggled to hold her composure, her throat tightened. She glanced down at her well-worn shoes and the plain fabric of her blouse, feeling the weight of the unspoken judgment. An elderly gentleman chuckled nearby, loudly enough to be heard by Lola. "She looks like she should be cleaning tables, not sitting at them." A wave of heat rose in her face, but she refused to respond. Her hands clenched the straps of her tote bag, fingers trembling just slightly. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. She was suddenly painfully aware of all the eyes locked on her, some filled with contempt, others with amusement. The manager folded her arms with an air of finality. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave if you don't go voluntarily," she declared. "We don't tolerate disruptions." Lola's mind raced, panic briefly igniting beneath her calm surface. She was fighting the urge to retreat, to disappear into the shadows. Her eyes flicked across the room, searching silently for some sign of support. But the patrons, silken gowns, crisp blazers, perfectly polished, looked away, whispering to themselves or flicking fingers across their phones, capturing her embarrassment to share later. Lola felt the flush of humiliation rise like a tide, hot and suffocating. She stood frozen, her breath quickening as the manager motioned toward two imposing men stationed near the entrance. They advanced slowly, deliberately, their expressions unreadable but their intent clear. "Please, you need to leave," the manager said, voice low but commanding. Lola swallowed hard. She felt the sharp stabs of betrayal, not from the manager alone, but from every person who had watched silently, like distant observers to her exclusion. Her eyes flicked over the room one last time and she caught the briefest glimpse of pity in a young waitress's gaze, but the girl looked away quickly, trapped by fears she did not voice aloud. With a soft breath, Lola started moving toward the exit, head held just a little higher than before, but the quiet defeat in her steps was undeniable. As the security men flanked her, the manager's voice carried through the space once more, "I'm sorry, but this is for everyone's sake." Outside, the fresh air was sharp and bitter compared to the warmth inside. Lola closed her eyes for a moment, tasting the sting of tears she refused to shed. She pressed her fingers to her lips and moved away from the entrance, the distant sound of laughter still echoing behind her walls like a cruel reminder. The grand windows displayed reflections of the elegant brunchers inside. She could see their animated talk, the clinking of fine china, the effortless grace of their world from which she had been barred. No one had come forward to help, not one voice had broken through the crowd to defend her. The exclusion was not just about a misplaced reservation, it was a deliberate barrier, a silent decree from those who believed spaces like this were not hers to occupy. Lola's chest tightened with a mixture of sorrow and something else, an ember of stubborn resilience flickering beneath the surface. She clenched her fists as the cool morning air brushed against her face. They had thrown her out without a second thought, but she wasn't ready to vanish yet. She stayed just beyond the revolving doors, quietly watching, waiting. Back inside the gleaming interior of Lambrosia, the brunch manager, Marissa Hart, returned to her office with a triumphant glow. She closed the door behind her with a decisive click, stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, and allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. "Handled it like a pro," she murmured to her assistant, Sarah, who glanced up from her clipboard with a tentative smile. Marissa's voice lowered as she began to justify her actions. "This place is sacred," she said firmly. "It's about exclusivity, about maintaining the perfect atmosphere. People who don't fit, they ruin everything. We protect our guests and our brand. Sometimes that means being ruthless. It's for the greater good." Sarah nodded but shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sharp edge in Marissa's words. But she seemed so calm, considering, she started, only to be cut off. Marissa waved a hand dismissively. "Calm? She's probably used to this kind of rejection. Unlike us, she doesn't belong here." Turning, she smoothed her jacket and added, "I'm proud of how we uphold standards, even if it means making tough decisions." Downstairs, the dining room's atmosphere gradually returned to its steady rhythm. The gentle clatter of cutlery on porcelain resumed, accompanied by the murmur of pleased conversations and soft laughter. The rumors about Lola's brief and unwelcome appearance began to fade as guests refocused on their brunch and the upcoming menu tasting. Yet, as the evening light faded, Lola stood outside, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. The sting of public humiliation burned faint but persistent. She closed her eyes and pressed her palm against the cool glass of the entrance, willing herself to be steady. The mixture of shame and anger churned quietly inside her, but she refused to give it space. Minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its engine silent against the soft chatter of the city street. A sharply dressed assistant from the restaurant stepped out, carrying an embossed envelope. He scanned the sidewalk carefully before crossing toward Lola. "Excuse me, are you Ms. Lola Cruz?" he asked politely but with unmistakable urgency. Lola looked at him in surprise, the moment jolting her from her thoughts. "Yes, that's me." He extended the envelope with a respectful nod. "On behalf of the executive team, we would like to invite you back inside. You have been requested by the ownership." His tone carried weight beyond mere formality. Inside, guests noticed the assistant's purposeful stride and Lola's hesitant return. Whispers rippled through the room like a rising tide. Some guests shifted in their seats, exchanging puzzled glances. Phones once meant for distraction now paused, anticipation building in the quiet hum. The manager Marissa's expression tightened at the sight. She exchanged a quick, uneasy glance with a few of the nearby staff. Something new, unexpected, had settled between the silverware and the crystal glasses, a shift in the delicate social order. As Lola came through the doors again, the general manager's voice rang out, carrying unmistakable authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention." The room stilled instantly. "We are honored today to welcome a special guest and keynote speaker for our event, Chef Lola Cruz," he said, voice warm and clear. The room's energy snapped taut, charged with surprise and curiosity. Lola stepped forward, shoulders squared, a subtle but elegant navy blazer now draped over her simple blouse. Her eyes scanned the crowd, calm but shining with quiet pride. The startling revelation washed over the room. She was not just an outsider, but the executive chef whose culinary vision had shaped this very restaurant's acclaimed seasonal menu. The lips that whispered scorn moments ago now parted in astonishment. Phones clicked off their cameras as guests processed the moment. Marissa's face paled, disbelief rooting her where she stood. Her earlier confidence crumbled beneath the weight of the unexpected truth. Lola's voice was steady as she addressed the room. "Thank you for this introduction. My work is born from a belief in transforming humble ingredients, honoring simplicity and sustainability. I recently returned from a visit to a small organic farm where many of the items you enjoy today were harvested." Her words carried the quiet conviction of someone who had weathered much, who embraced her craft not for the spotlight but for the soul of it. She did not seek to lecture or chastise. Instead, she embodied the grace and strength that many here had overlooked. Guests whispered among themselves, astonished by the contrast between the woman before them and the assumptions made moments earlier. The snobbery that had fueled their laughter now left a lingering sting, replaced by a new, uneasy respect. Lola's presence was a mirror held up to the subtle prejudices that underpinned the exclusivity they had so confidently upheld. Her success story was woven not in designer fabric or luxury, but in passion, resilience, and an unyielding dedication to her craft. For a moment, the room was suspended, caught between the past and the redefinition of value in this space. The silence that followed Lola's introduction was thick and charged, as if the grand dining room itself held its breath. Then, a sound barely louder than a whisper stirred among the gathered guests, a collective intake of astonishment rising like a wave. Phones, once aimed discreetly at Lola in derision, lowered in unison, the camera's flashes fading into inaction. Conversations that had just minutes ago circled around her supposed misstep now shifted to stunned murmurs that spread like wildfire. Marissa Hart stood rooted near the entrance, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, face pale and rigid. The confidence she had carried mere moments ago dissipated completely, replaced by disbelief, then a flicker of fear. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking an ally or some form of escape, but none came. The very room she had policed with such cold precision was now a tribunal, its verdict unspoken but clear. The highlight of the revelation was the undeniable truth. Lola Cruz was the creative force behind the culinary masterpieces served at L'Ambrosia, the very heart of the restaurant's prestige. No longer was she a faceless simple woman, she was a celebrated artist in her own right, whose talent had drawn the most discerning palates east and west to this temple of taste. As Lola stepped confidently to the center of the room, the elegant blazer over her thrifted blouse served as a visual symbol of the bridge between understated authenticity and refined excellence. With her voice calm and clear, she addressed the guests. I believe true luxury lies in respect for fresh ingredients, for people's stories, and for the diversity of experience. I choose my clothing each day with care, yes, but also with practicality and purpose. Today, I arrived here directly from a remote farm where I've been working closely with growers who share a commitment to sustainability. Each word was a quiet statement of her values, contrasting sharply with the shallow judgments earlier hurled by those who valued appearances above all. The room caught on, the emotional tide turning. Eyes that had once flicked away in disdain now focused intently, seeking to reconcile these newly revealed truths. Guests began whispering to one another, their earlier mockery replaced by a collective re-evaluation. Some leaned forward, nodding appreciatively at stories they'd only heard in passing about Lola's innovation and humble beginnings. Others exchanged awkward glances, aware they had wrongfully dismissed a woman of true stature. Lillian and Eric, two regulars infamous for their snobbery, murmured apologies to each other, while avoiding direct eye contact with Lola. Marissa's face flushed with shame. Her earlier bravado dissolved, replaced by visible discomfort. Around the room, the atmosphere shifted palpably from exclusivity to contemplation. No one dared laugh or make petty remarks anymore. The social hierarchy had been upended by grace and quiet power. Instead of gloating, Lola remained composed, graceful, the embodiment of strength without aggression. She did not revel in retribution. Instead, her presence was a living rebuke to arrogance and superficiality. The general manager, sensing the moment's significance, stepped forward and echoed a sentiment that rippled through the room. Tonight, we are reminded that true distinction is not measured by outward appearances, but by the integrity and passion one brings to their work. Lola Cruz reminds us all why we gather here, not to judge, but to celebrate excellence in all its forms. The crowd responded with genuine applause, gesturing not just to Lola's achievements but to the values she represented. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that L'Ambrosia's identity had shifted, catalyzed by this humble yet extraordinary woman. In a final, telling moment, Marissa approached Lola quietly, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, she said, eyes downcast. Lola met her gaze, offering a small, understanding smile. Thank you for saying that, she replied softly, embodying the grace that had defined her journey. As the guests dispersed, the energy in the room was irrevocably changed. The walls that had once echoed with quiet exclusion now resonated with a deeper appreciation for authenticity, a shift that would linger long after the night ended. Lola's humility and strength had not only reclaimed her place but had woven a new thread into the fabric of L'Ambrosia's storied legacy, quietly yet powerfully transforming the space forever. The atmosphere at L'Ambrosia was charged, the usual buzz of refined chatter replaced by a hum of murmurs and shifting whispers. The glowing crystal chandeliers seemed to cast sharper light now, exposing the brittle fissures in the polished veneer of exclusivity the restaurant had long cherished. At the center of it all stood Lola Cruz, calm, composed, and undeniably dignified, a living reminder of resilience and quiet power. From the sidelines, the restaurant owner, Mr. Alexander Ward, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and a voice that commanded attention, stepped forward. His eyes locked onto Marissa Hart, the brunch manager whose earlier arrogance had set the day's events in motion. The crowd hushed once more as he addressed the room, voice steady and authoritative. Marissa, he began, this establishment has always prided itself on excellence. not only in cuisine but in respect, toward our guests, our staff, and anyone who walks through our doors. Today's incident has demonstrated a failure to uphold those values. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your managerial duties pending further review. The room seemed to hold its breath as Marissa's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to protest but found no words. Instead, she stood rigid, the weight of the room's collective judgment pressing down on her. Mr. Ward continued, "We will also implement mandatory training on inclusivity and customer relations for all staff members. Our reputation depends not just on the food we serve, but the environment we foster." Murmurs of approval swept through the guests and staff alike. The social tides had decisively turned. Lillian and Eric, the self-appointed social arbiters who had sneered at Lola earlier, now avoided Marissa's gaze, their own embarrassment palpable. Whispers warned of the viral videos already circulating on social media, tagging the brunch manager with accusations of elitism and cruelty. Later that evening, as the restaurant began its closing ritual, Marissa found herself walking alone through the now quiet kitchen hallway, the fierce glare of judgment replaced by a heavy cloud of shame. Ahead, the sound of chopping softened as Lola prepared a small late-night tasting plate. Noticing Marissa's tentative approach, Lola looked up calmly. The two women met, the moment thick with unspoken tension. Marissa's voice was barely steady. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Truly." Lola nodded, her expression gentle but firm. "Thank you. It takes courage to acknowledge mistakes." Marissa swallowed hard, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through the once imperious facade. I was wrong. I judged without knowing, and I let fear of losing control cloud my judgment." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Lola smiled faintly, the smallest curve of her lips a gesture of unexpected grace. "There's always room to grow," Lola said softly. "The world's big enough for both of us to learn." As Marissa turned to leave, there was a shift in her step, less defiant, more contemplative. Outside, Lola stepped into the brisk night air, the city lights shimmering like distant stars. Her stride was purposeful and calm, a woman who had reclaimed her place not with loud confrontation but with steadfast dignity. Around her, the patrons and staff of Lambrosia watched silently, some with awe, others with a newfound respect that transcended appearances. The elegant restaurant, once a symbol of exclusivity and exclusion, now buzzed with quiet transformation. Lola's presence had altered its course, a subtle but undeniable shift toward a more inclusive, respectful future. With each step Lola took away from the restaurant that night, the echoes of judgment faded, replaced by whispers of change, an unspoken legacy of courage, humility, and grace that would endure far beyond the evening's last light.